Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to more coverage all about the RTX 5090. Today we're actually looking at the 5090 versus the 4090. We're going to be looking at a whole host of different games, some are single player, some are multiplayer, and obviously I'm going to walk you through all of the results and how they feel and essentially what you need to look out for. So what you're seeing now is actually some Fortnite. This is running at 3840 by 1600, so just a smidge under 4K, and pretty much the main theme really that you're going to find throughout this is that it's quite easy to run into CPU bottlenecks. The easiest way to have a look at this is the top left-hand corner of your screen, where you see the GPU utilization. You can see at the moment we're only really around about 80 to 85% or so, and the lower this number goes, then obviously that's the less amount of GPU that we're essentially using, and the more of it that is being wasted. Now, all of this capture was actually recorded on a 7800X3D, so obviously you can go even faster with a 9800, which is what I would definitely recommend, but in the full video that you can find in the top left-hand corner of your screen, when we did a full build with this with a 9800X3D, this still was not quite enough. Now, moving on to Apex Legends, and this was a bit of an interesting one because there is actually a hard cap at 300 FPS. So obviously if this was removed, we will get even higher FPS. But if you have a close look at those 1% lows, you can actually see quite a massive difference between the 4090 and the 5090. Part of me thinks maybe this was just a bad game with a bit of lag or something like that, because I wouldn't expect there to be this level of difference. But hey, this is essentially what we got, so this is what we do have to report. But yes, if you're looking to play Apex Legends, then it's definitely fair to say that it is going to be massively overkill, and you do not need an RTX 5090 to get the best out of it. Obviously, if you're playing competitively, then great if you can use it for other things too, but yes, £2,000 or $2,000 in Apex Legends doesn't really get you that much extra FPS. I mean, just look at that GPU utilization, around about 60% on the 5090 and close to 80% on the 4090, so it doesn't matter which one you go for, you would definitely be losing a fair bit of FPS and leaving it on the table. Moving across to some Call of Duty Warzone though, and this is a little bit of a different story. It is more demanding on both the graphics card and the CPU, but I did expect to see a little bit more CPU bottlenecking. I think we definitely are getting some here, especially on the 5090, but you can clearly see that there is a difference in frame rate here, which is great to see. So if you are an avid Warzone player and you want to get the absolute fastest frame rate possible, then clearly the 5090 is going to be the card for you. Having said that though, again, 7800X3D does seem to be holding this back a little bit. Our GPU utilization is only about 90% or so on the 5090, but again, I did think this was going to be a lot worse. Now, both of them actually played very well. There was a few stutters and a few dips with 1% lows and things, but this is just more down to the game really, rather than the GPUs you use themselves. Now next up, we have a game that I've genuinely had to uninstall and ban from my personal use because I was getting far too angry. This is some Smite 2, it's a MOBA. As you can see, it's in beta, so it's not the best optimized title, but again, this is another one where we are getting bottlenecked by our 7800X3D. Surprisingly though, there is still a decent game with the 5090, but not really anything I think you'd see major differences in. Obviously, this is a game where you really do have to be hot in your aiming, so you do want the lowest latency possible because it is going to make a big difference, but again, I'm not really sure about that extra 20 or 30 FPS is really going to make a big difference. But once again, it's nice to see, even in CPU bound scenarios, in some games, and actually in quite a lot of games, you will still see slightly higher frame rates, but again, you are going to be held back by the CPU here. I kept searching through my library though, and I came across CS2. Unfortunately, just like Fortnite, this was another multiplayer title where we are actually seeing some pretty big gains. At times you can get almost like 50 to 100 FPS more. Our 1% lows as well actually did seem to improve quite a lot with the 5090, but then in some other tests that we've done, it was at times not the absolute best out there. So I still think there's a fair bit of driver optimization actually to do with the 5090. So I do think there is definitely a fair bit more optimization that Nvidia can do with the driver. So maybe the results will get even better over time, but once again, you can't really get over the fact that the CPU bottleneck is going to hold you back. And bearing in mind, you're probably not really going to be playing these games at such high resolution anyway. You are really going to be seeing diminishing returns if you go for a 5090, just specifically for multiplayer. However, the story does start to change a bit when we start to go towards our single player titles, especially when we talk ray tracing or of course frame generation, and don't worry, we're covering all of that stuff in just a second. But here in Ghost of Tsushima, you can see pretty sky high frame rates on both, around about 140 FPS to around about 160 or so when you're looking on the 5090. So again, not like a huge gain, but our good old friend the CPU bottleneck rears its ugly head with around about 85 to 90% GPU utilization. So at least it's going to save you a little bit on power, but I don't think you spend this much money to run into CPU bottlenecks. Again, can't stress this enough. If you're going to be playing at 4K, then you're going to run into like less of a bottleneck. If you turn the upscaling off or reduce it down, then again, you're going to not necessarily increase your frame rate, but you're going to allow yourself to use more of that GPU. But it's not necessarily Nvidia's fault, but it is just a little bit disappointing, I think, if you spend all of this money, even if you have a top-end GPU like a, I don't know, 13900K or 7800X3D, to still kind of run into these issues. I did say about ray tracing though, and as soon as we move over to our ray trace title, or at least our first one, this being some Returnal, here we can really start to see some decent improvements. A lot of this really comes down to the fact that in terms of the fundamental architecture, the architecture, not that much has actually changed from the CUDA core side, so the actual raw rasterization performance, but as soon as you get into the tensor cores or the RT cores are actually baked onto the GPU itself, this is the sort of area where you are going to see some big gains. And clearly in Returnal, this is a good example. Even without any like fancy path tracing or anything like that, you are just going to get a more stable experience, and you are going to just get a better ray tracing experience really in general from that higher frame rate. Here comes the real test for a lot of people though. This of course being some Cyberpunk 2077, and this was quite difficult to actually get lined up, but I've done my best for you. So here we have the 4090 and the 5090 with and without frame gen. We're using the 2x on the 4090 because that's all you can actually use. The brand new feature with the 5090 and the 50 series is you can use the multi-frame generation, so you can go up to 4x. Now, from my experience, all of them actually felt pretty good. Even on the 4090, path tracing, if you're using DLSS performance, still did feel pretty good, but anything under that really and you were going to run into issues. But both of these cards hold up quite well, but if you do have a high refresh rate monitor or you just want to get the smoothest image possible, this is where you are going to want to turn on frame gen, or of course lower down the ray tracing to RT Ultra rather than the path tracing. But it kind of seems a bit pointless if you're going to spend this sort of money to not actually go down the route of path tracing. But I will say that whilst the frame gen definitely looks great from a FPS counter sort of view, in terms of visual quality, you definitely can notice it at times, and if you are moving quite quickly on a vehicle or you move the mouse around quickly, you can start to notice that the image will fall apart. Definitely worth experimenting with, but I would definitely agree with a lot of reviewers really that the frame generation shouldn't be compared to any native rasterization because the image quality is not the same. Now, moving across to Hogwarts Legacy, you'd think this would be the same story, wouldn't you? But it's kind of different in a couple of ways. Firstly, this does actually go to show that it can help to remove the CPU bottlenecks of your system, because it's absolutely ridiculous to be getting over 400 FPS with the RTX 5090 with the FrameGen 4X feature, but because this isn't really the best optimized title, Nvidia actually didn't like the fact that we were doing our testing in Hogsmeade, but we stand by it because this is obviously what's going to be real world if you want to walk around Hogsmeade. Because this is so CPU dependent, we do a lot of our CPU testing here, and this means that you can get a lot of stutter. So if you look at those 1% lows, you'll find that it does frequently stutter, and it's a pretty jarring experience actually to be getting such a high frame rate even without frame gen, and then to get the hitching and stutter. And I don't want to say the frame gen necessarily makes this worse, but it doesn't change the fact that the game still doesn't really feel that good if you run into a scenario like this. I mean, okay, if you're playing like a lot of the title, like around the castle or on the grounds and things, you're a lot less likely to run into these issues, but they do persist, and this is a game that's been out for quite a long time now, and it's just not really been fixed. But yeah, sky-high frame rates if you turn on that frame gen feature. Same with Dragon Age Veilgard, actually. I've got quite far in now, so you're seeing some gameplay from the other night where we decided to actually fight a candlestick, which was fun. It is a fun game, to be fair. I mean, the story's not great, I'll be honest with you, but the gameplay's definitely worth checking out. But this is one of those titles, again, where you do have multi-frame generation. It's worth noting that any DLSS 3 title, once this card has launched, you will be able to go back and actually use the NVIDIA override in the NVIDIA app to get the 3 and 4 times frame gen, and that's actually what I had to do here to get it to work. But there will also be native integrations in games with this DLSS 4 suite, if you like, so it'll be interesting to see how much difference there is, but in theory they should be the same. You can also inject DLAA if you want, which is their deep learning anti-aliasing, if you don't want to use DLSS but still want to use that same AI algorithm to give you even better image quality. But another title, really high frame rates, but personally speaking, I'd still rather just play this with the frame gen off. I mean, it depends on the monitor you have, essentially. If you're playing on 120Hz screen like I am, turn it off, have the best possible latency. If you're running this on like a 480Hz monitor or anything really where you want to maximize the frame rate, this is where you can turn frame generation on. But all in all, these have been your numbers. I'll keep this short and sweet. If there's any other games you want to see, let me know down in the comment section below. But check out my full build where I go into much greater detail on all of this stuff with the link down below. Thanks for watching, guys.